Jung discovered that authentic people are rejected for a sinister reason that most don't realize. If you've ever felt punished for being honest while fake people get celebrated, if you've ever wondered why your transparency makes others so uncomfortable, what Jung found in his clinical work will shock you. He discovered that your truth doesn't just make people uncomfortable, it functions as a psychological X-ray that exposes what others desperately want to hide. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to have a physical reaction to your honesty? How they become agitated, defensive, or even angry when you're simply being genuine? Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon and realized that authentic people don't just trigger discomfort, they activate something much deeper and more threatening in others' unconscious minds. Your presence alone becomes a truth serum that forces others to confront realities they've spent years avoiding. What I'm about to share will completely transform how you understand rejection. Jung's research reveals that when authentic people are pushed away, dismissed, or attacked, it's never really about them. It's about the psychological threat they represent to others' carefully constructed false realities. By the end of this, you'll understand that every time someone rejects your authenticity, they're actually confirming something profound about your rare psychological development. Your truth isn't the problem, it's the solution others aren't ready for. Your presence is a living lie detector. Jung's first revelation about authentic people will change how you see every uncomfortable social interaction you've ever experienced. When you show up genuinely, without pretense or performance, you become what Jung called a psychological truth serum. Your energy automatically exposes the gap between who people pretend to be and who they actually are, and this exposure triggers their deepest psychological defenses. Think about it. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately sensed that people were being fake, performing, or hiding something? Have you ever had someone become inexplicably hostile toward you even though you hadn't done anything wrong? Jung discovered that authentic people possess what he called energetic transparency, a quality that makes deception and manipulation visible to others in the room, even when nothing is said directly. This isn't about being judgmental or superior. It's about the unconscious psychological impact of genuine presence. When you're not performing, not wearing a mask, not trying to impress or manipulate, your natural state creates what Jung called comparative authenticity. Others can sense the difference between your genuine expression and their performed behavior. And this comparison triggers what psychologists call exposure anxiety. The neurological research supports Jung's observations. Studies show that people engaged in deceptive behavior experience heightened stress responses when encountering individuals they perceive as genuine. Their nervous systems literally interpret authentic presence as a threat to their psychological safety. You become dangerous not because of what you do, but because of what you represent. The possibility that others could see through their carefully maintained facades. Jung also noticed that this dynamic operates completely below the level of conscious awareness. People don't think, "This person is exposing my lies." Instead, they experience an inexplicable discomfort, an urge to discredit you, distance themselves from you, or find fault with your character. They might label you as intense, judgmental, or difficult, but what they're really responding to is your function as a psychological mirror that refuses to reflect their false image back to them. This is why authentic people often feel like outsiders in social situations built on pretense. Your presence alone disrupts the unconscious agreement others have made to maintain comfortable illusions about themselves and each other. You become the child in the story, pointing out that the emperor has no clothes. And instead of thanking you for your honesty, the crowd turns against you for disrupting their shared delusion. But Jung discovered something even more disturbing about how your authenticity affects others. You are the mirror that reflects their unhealed wounds. Jung's second major insight reveals why authentic people often become targets of inexplicable anger and resentment. When you've done your psychological work, when you've integrated your shadow and healed your trauma, you become what Jung called a wounded healer. Your healing doesn't just inspire others, it exposes their refusal to heal their own wounds. And this exposure triggers what he termed shadow projection. Jung extensively studied how people project their disowned qualities onto others, but he made a crucial distinction about how this works with authentic individuals. When you embody qualities that others have suppressed in themselves, when you express emotions they've learned to hide, when you demonstrate self-acceptance they've never achieved, you become a walking reminder of their unlived potential. And instead of inspiration, this often triggers rage. Have you ever had someone become angry at you for being calm during a crisis? Have you ever been accused of showing off when you were simply being yourself? Have you ever noticed people attacking you for qualities they claim to admire in others? Jung would say you're witnessing shadow projection in action. These individuals hate in you what they've learned to deny in themselves. This dynamic is particularly cruel because the very people who need your modeling the most are often the ones who reject it most violently. Jung observed that individuals carrying unhealed trauma often develop what he called healing allergies. They become hypersensitive to evidence of others' psychological health because it highlights their own psychological dysfunction. Your peace becomes evidence of their chaos. Your self-acceptance reveals their self-rejection. Your emotional freedom exposes their emotional imprisonment. The psychological mechanism runs even deeper. Jung discovered that people often create entire identities around their wounds, their struggles, their limitations. When they encounter someone who has transcended similar challenges, it doesn't just make them uncomfortable, it threatens their entire sense of self. If you can heal from trauma, grow beyond dysfunction, or find peace after pain, what does that say about their choice to remain stuck? Modern psychology confirms Jung's insights about this dynamic. Research in trauma psychology shows that people often develop what scientists call learned helplessness, but Jung added a crucial element. They also develop learned hopelessness, a deep belief that transformation isn't possible. When you show up as living proof that healing is possible, you challenge this fundamental belief system, and their psyche responds as if you're attacking their core identity. Jung also noted that this projection often manifests as people finding fault with your healing process itself. They might accuse you of being fake, of spiritual bypassing, or of thinking you're better than everyone else. But what they're really saying is that your transformation makes them uncomfortably aware of their own capacity for change, a capacity they've chosen not to exercise. You become the mirror reflecting their potential, and instead of embracing what they see, they attack the mirror. Have you ever noticed people reacting with anger to your inner peace? Let me know in the comments, because Jung's next discovery reveals how your authenticity threatens the very systems others use to survive. Your authenticity threatens their survival system. Jung's third revelation exposes one of the most painful truths about human psychology. Most people build their entire sense of safety around maintaining false personas, and your authentic presence threatens to collapse these carefully constructed psychological defense systems. What looks like social rejection is actually a form of psychological self-preservation. Jung called this phenomenon systemic authenticity resistance. He observed that families, social groups, and even entire cultures often operate on unspoken agreements about what truths can be acknowledged and what realities must be denied. When you stop participating in these collective delusions, when you start speaking truths that others have agreed to ignore, you become what he termed a system disruptor. Think about family dynamics where everyone agrees to pretend that the alcoholic parent isn't drinking, or the abusive member isn't harmful, or the dysfunctional patterns aren't destroying everyone involved. When one person starts being honest about these realities, when they stop enabling and start truth-telling, the entire system mobilizes to silence them. You're not being rejected for being wrong, you're being rejected for being right in a system that requires wrongness to survive. This dynamic extends far beyond family systems. Jung noticed that workplaces, social circles, and even romantic relationships often depend on shared illusions and mutual enabling. Your authenticity doesn't just disrupt these patterns, it exposes them as choices rather than inevitable realities. And this exposure is terrifying for people whose entire sense of stability depends on maintaining these illusions. The psychological mechanism is fascinating. Jung discovered that people often develop what he called complementary dysfunction, where their identity becomes so intertwined with dysfunctional patterns that healthy behavior feels foreign and threatening. When you model healthy boundaries, authentic communication, or genuine self-care, you're not just doing something different, you're proving that their dysfunction is optional rather than necessary. Neurological research reveals that this threat response operates at a primitive level. When people encounter behavior that challenges their established coping mechanisms, the brain's threat detection system activates as if responding to physical danger. Your authenticity literally triggers their fight or flight response because you represent the collapse of psychological structures they've relied on for survival. Jung also observed that this resistance often escalates when the authentic person is someone close to them. Family members, longtime friends, or intimate partners have the most investment in keeping you frozen in your old patterns because your growth forces them to confront questions about their own development that they've been avoiding. Your evolution becomes evidence of their stagnation. Your healing highlights their refusal to heal. Your authenticity exposes their commitment to pretense. The cruelest aspect of this dynamic is that the very people who claim to love you the most are often the ones who resist your authenticity the most violently. Jung understood that this isn't conscious malice, it's unconscious terror. They're not trying to hurt you, they're trying to preserve the psychological ecosystem that their sense of safety depends on, even when that ecosystem is toxic for everyone involved. But Jung observed something even more profound about how your freedom affects others. You represent the freedom they're afraid to pursue. Jung's fourth insight reveals why authentic people often trigger such intense emotional reactions in others. You embody the psychological freedom that others desperately want but are terrified to claim. Your ability to live from inner truth rather than external expectation becomes a constant reminder of the choices they're not making, the risks they're not taking, the life they're not living. Jung wrote extensively about what he called psychological imprisonment, the ways people trap themselves in careers, relationships, and identities that don't serve their authentic development. Most people don't even recognize they're imprisoned because the bars are made of social expectations, family obligations, and unconscious beliefs rather than steel. But when they encounter someone who has broken free, who lives from genuine choice rather than unconscious compulsion, it creates what Jung termed existential crisis. Have you ever shared excitement about a new direction in your life, only to have others respond with fear, discouragement, or subtle sabotage? Have you noticed how uncomfortable people become when you start making choices based on your authentic desires rather than what's expected or safe? Jung would say you're triggering their awareness of their own unlived life, their own unexpressed potential, their own capacity for freedom that they've chosen to ignore. This dynamic is especially evident when you start setting boundaries, pursuing dreams, or leaving situations that no longer serve you. Others often interpret your self-liberation as an implicit criticism of their choice to remain stuck. Your courage to change becomes evidence of their cowardice to grow. Your willingness to risk becomes a mirror for their commitment to safety. Your expansion highlights their contraction. Jung discovered that most people develop what he called freedom phobia, a deep terror of the responsibility that comes with authentic choice. It's easier to blame circumstances, other people, or bad luck than to acknowledge the ways they've participated in creating their own limitations. When you model genuine agency, when you demonstrate that transformation is possible, you strip away their excuses and force them to confront their own power to change their lives. The psychological research confirms Jung's observations. Studies show that people living inauthentic lives often experience what researchers call vicarious achievement anxiety when witnessing others' authentic success. Your freedom doesn't inspire them, it threatens them because it proves that their limitations are largely self-imposed. Your ability to break free from conditioning becomes evidence that their conditioning is a choice they're making rather than a reality they're trapped in. Jung also noted that this dynamic creates what he called liberation envy, where people simultaneously long for your freedom and resent you for having it. They want what you have, but aren't willing to do what you've done to get it. They want the results of your courage without taking the risks your courage required. And when they realize this gap, they often choose to attack your freedom rather than pursue their own. This is why people often try to convince you that your choices are selfish, irresponsible, or dangerous. They're not really concerned about you. They're trying to convince themselves that their prison is necessary and your freedom is an illusion. But Jung understood that your commitment to authentic living serves a crucial function in the collective unconscious. You become proof that liberation is possible, even when others aren't ready to believe it. How many times have you been called selfish for simply honoring your authentic needs? Write your number in the comments, because Jung's next revelation explains why your self-acceptance triggers such intense reactions in others. Your presence activates their collective inferiority complex. Jung's fifth discovery reveals a psychological mechanism that explains why authentic people often become targets of group hostility and systematic undermining. When you operate from genuine self-acceptance and inner worth, you inadvertently trigger what Jung called comparative inadequacy in others. Your wholeness doesn't just highlight their fragmentation, it activates deep-seated beliefs about their own fundamental inadequacy. Jung extensively studied inferiority complexes, but he made a crucial observation about how they operate in social contexts. When someone with strong self-acceptance enters a group of people struggling with self-worth, it doesn't inspire the group to develop better self-relationships. Instead, it often triggers what he called collective leveling, unconscious group behavior designed to bring the confident person down rather than lifting everyone up. Have you ever walked into a room feeling good about yourself only to have multiple people find subtle ways to undermine your confidence? Have you ever noticed how groups sometimes unite against the person who seems most comfortable in their own skin? Jung would say you're witnessing the inferiority complex operating at a collective level. Your self-acceptance becomes a threat to the group's shared identity built around inadequacy and struggle. This dynamic manifests in fascinating ways. People might constantly interrupt you, dismiss your achievements, or find fault with qualities they would praise in others. They might engage in what Jung called confidence vampirism, constantly seeking reassurance and validation from you while simultaneously undermining your sense of worth. Your inner stability becomes something they need to feed on while destroying. The psychological mechanism runs deeper than individual jealousy. Jung discovered that many social groups form around shared wounds, collective complaints, or mutual validation of limitation. When you no longer participate in these bonding rituals, when you stop complaining, gossiping, or engaging in self-deprecating humor, you threaten the very foundation that holds the group together. Your self-acceptance breaks the unspoken agreement to maintain collective inadequacy. Modern research in social psychology confirms Jung's insights. Studies show that groups often engage in what researchers call tall poppy syndrome, the tendency to attack or undermine individuals who stand out positively from the group. But Jung added a crucial element. This isn't random jealousy. It's a systematic defense against the psychological growth that your presence represents. Jung also observed that this dynamic often escalates in professional and family environments where people feel trapped together. Your growing confidence and self-acceptance become daily reminders of their choice to remain small, self-critical, and limited. Instead of using your example as inspiration, they often interpret your self-worth as evidence of your arrogance, your confidence as proof of your selfishness, your success as confirmation of your superiority complex. The cruelest aspect is that they often disguise this dynamic as concern for your well-being or attempts to keep you humble. They might tell you that you're getting too big for your britches, that success is changing you, or that you need to remember where you came from. But Jung understood that they're really trying to restore the psychological equilibrium that your growth has disrupted. They need you to shrink back to their level, to feel comfortable with their own choice to remain small. Jung noted that this collective response serves a function in maintaining group cohesion, but at the expense of individual development. Groups unconsciously conspire to prevent any member from outgrowing the collective limitations because one person's growth threatens everyone else's excuses. Your self-acceptance becomes evidence that their self-rejection is optional and that realization is more threatening than inspiring for most people. You are living proof that evolution is possible. Jung's sixth revelation exposes perhaps the most threatening aspect of authentic presence. You serve as undeniable evidence that psychological growth, healing, and transformation are not only possible, but achievable. For people who have convinced themselves that change is impossible, that they're stuck with their limitations, that their dysfunction is permanent, your very existence becomes a challenge to their entire worldview. Jung called this the evidence problem. When people encounter someone who has genuinely transformed, who has healed from similar trauma, who has grown beyond comparable limitations, it creates what he termed cognitive dissonance of impossibility. Their minds struggle to reconcile your transformation with their beliefs about their own unchangeability, and rather than embracing the possibility you represent, they often choose to attack the evidence you provide. Have you ever shared your growth journey only to have others minimize your progress, question your methods, or suggest that your changes aren't real or sustainable? Have you noticed how uncomfortable people become when you demonstrate that patterns they consider permanent can actually be shifted? Jung would say, you're threatening their investment in their own stagnation. This dynamic is particularly evident when you heal from trauma that others carry, develop emotional intelligence they lack, or create healthy relationships after experiencing dysfunction. Your progress becomes a mirror, reflecting their choice to remain stuck. Your healing highlights their refusal to heal. Your growth exposes their commitment to limitation. Instead of celebrating your evolution, they often work to undermine or discredit it. Jung observed that people often develop what he called therapeutic nihilism, a deep belief that real change is impossible and that anyone claiming transformation is either lying or deluded. When you show up as living proof that their nihilism is wrong, that growth is possible, that healing can happen, you threaten their entire psychological defense system built around hopelessness. The neurological research reveals fascinating patterns here. Studies show that when people encounter evidence that contradicts their established beliefs about possibility and limitation, it activates the same brain regions associated with physical threat. Your transformation literally registers as dangerous to their psychological survival because it challenges beliefs they've used to justify their stagnation. Jung also discovered that this resistance often intensifies when your growth involves areas where they've given up. If you develop the healthy relationship they believe is impossible, create the career success they've decided is unattainable, or find the inner peace they've convinced themselves is unreachable, your achievement becomes more than inspiration. It becomes an indictment of their surrender. This is why people often try to convince you that your changes are temporary, that you'll regress, or that your success is due to luck rather than effort. They need your transformation to be false, because if it's real, it proves that their limitations are choices rather than facts. Your evolution becomes evidence of their capacity for growth, and that evidence is terrifying for someone who has built their identity around being stuck. Jung understood that this dynamic explains much of the resistance authentic people face from those closest to them. Family members, old friends, and intimate partners have the most investment in your remaining the same because your growth forces them to confront questions about their own potential that they've been avoiding. Your transformation becomes a challenge to the entire system of relationships built around shared limitations and mutual stagnation. But Jung's final discovery reveals the deepest reason why your truth is so threatening to others. You carry the light they chose to extinguish. Jung's seventh and final revelation unveils the most profound reason why authentic people face rejection and hostility. You represent the inner light, the essential vitality, the core aliveness that others have learned to suppress or abandon. Your luminosity doesn't just contrast with their darkness, it reminds them of the light they once carried and chose to extinguish for acceptance, safety, or survival. Jung wrote extensively about what he called soul murder, the process by which people gradually disconnect from their authentic essence to fit into families, cultures, or systems that cannot tolerate their true nature. This isn't a conscious choice. It's a survival adaptation that children make when their genuine expression threatens their psychological or physical safety. But when these individuals encounter someone who has reconnected with their essential self, it triggers what Jung termed luminosity grief, a deep mourning for their own abandoned authenticity. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to have a visceral reaction to your joy, your peace, or your aliveness? How they become uncomfortable when you express genuine enthusiasm, celebrate your successes, or simply radiate contentment. Jung would say you're activating their awareness of the vitality they sacrificed, the joy they learned to suppress, the aliveness they chose to dim in order to survive their early environments. This dynamic explains why light bearers have been persecuted throughout history. It's not that darkness hates light out of pure malevolence. It's that light reminds those who have chosen darkness of what they gave up to make that choice. Your radiance becomes a painful reminder of their own dormant luminosity. Your vitality highlights their chosen numbness. Your authentic expression exposes their performed existence. Jung observed that most people experience what he called authenticity amnesia, a forgetting of their true nature so complete that they believe their false self is all they are. When they encounter someone operating from genuine essence, it doesn't feel inspiring, it feels foreign and threatening. Your naturalness seems abnormal to people who have normalized their disconnection from themselves. The psychological mechanism is profound. Jung discovered that witnessing authentic expression can trigger what he called essence activation in others, a stirring of their own dormant authenticity. But instead of welcoming this awakening, most people experience it as destabilizing and dangerous. They've built entire lives around their false selves, and your presence threatens to collapse these carefully constructed identities. Modern research in developmental psychology confirms Jung's observations. Studies show that adults who experienced early trauma often develop what researchers call authenticity phobia, a deep fear of their own genuine expression. When they encounter others expressing authentically, it activates both longing and terror, the desire for genuine connection and the fear of being seen or rejected for who they truly are. Jung also noted that this dynamic creates what he called transcendent function resistance. Authentic individuals serve as catalysts for others' potential awakening, but most people resist this function because it requires them to face everything they've been avoiding about themselves and their lives. Your presence becomes an invitation to psychological and spiritual growth that most people find too challenging to accept. This is why authentic people often feel like they're living in exile, surrounded by others, but fundamentally alone in their commitment to truth and genuine expression. Jung would say you're serving what he called the individuation imperative, the psychological drive toward wholeness and authenticity that most people resist. You've chosen the hero's journey, while others have chosen the comfort of familiar limitation. The final insight Jung offers is both heartbreaking and empowering. He discovered that light bearers must learn to shine regardless of others' reactions, not out of arrogance or superiority, but out of service to the collective healing of human consciousness. Your authenticity plants seeds in others' psyches that may not sprout for years or decades. Your rejection today might become someone else's inspiration tomorrow. Every time someone turns away from your authenticity, they're confirming your rare psychological development. Every time your truth makes someone uncomfortable, you're serving as a catalyst for their potential growth, even if they reject that catalyst. Every time you choose genuineness over pretense, you're contributing to the collective awakening of human consciousness, one authentic moment at a time. Understanding why your truth exposes others changes everything about how you interpret rejection. Jung's insights reveal that the hostility you face isn't evidence of your flaws. It's confirmation of your psychological evolution. Your commitment to authenticity in a world that rewards pretense. Your dedication to truth in environments that celebrate deception. Your choice to remain genuine despite rejection. These aren't character defects. They're signs of rare psychological courage. The people who can't handle your truth are showing you exactly who they are and what they've chosen to prioritize. Jung would say, this is information, not condemnation. Use it to recognize your tribe, the rare individuals who celebrate authenticity, embrace growth, and support genuine expression. These people exist, and your commitment to truth will eventually magnetize them into your life while repelling those who prefer comfortable illusions. Your truth isn't the problem, it's the solution others aren't ready for. Your authenticity isn't a flaw in your character, it's evidence of your advanced psychological development. And in a world full of people hiding from their own reality, your commitment to truth is the most radical and necessary gift you can offer. Share this with someone who needs to understand that being rejected for being real is actually a profound honor. Which of these insights most shifted your perspective on rejection? Let me know in the comments, because your journey toward authenticity is changing the world, one truth at a time.